International community do not seem to be willing to acknowledge that their former ally is the cause of this war.
Do my best to inform the American public.
A genuinely horrific conflict, as people in Amhara have experienced particularly.
Because of the attacks of the Tigray People's Liberation Front.
Western people whose mismanagement of this conflict has made it worse.
Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch also typically defend the State Department position.
In the Amhara region, so in Welkite.
The Gondar region in Welkite.
And they need to get out of that prison because they're on the wrong side of reality.
When you see the international media coverage regarding to the destruction, the murder, the killing, and the looting that TPLF has done during its belligerence to Amhara region and Afar regions, you have observed a number of destructions. You have talked to IDPs, you have talked to victims in the areas you have observed. So, according to what you have said earlier, much is not known in the international community. The media outlets are very essential. For instance, when you see international media like CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, CGTN, and other international media outlets, they didn't give due focus for the destructions that is raised by the belligerence of TPLF, the invasion of TPLF in these areas. So much is not known. Why not give due coverage for the situations in Amhara and Afar regions?
They typically repeat the positions of the U.S. State Department. They are owned by a handful of enormous corporations. Their interests, they perceive their interests to be aligned with the State Department, and that's what they're going to report. CNN was absolutely horrible. You probably know about Nimel Bugger, who continually reported that there is a Tigray genocide underway. They also, these outlets repeat anything that Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch says, and Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch also typically defend the State Department position. And so they've over and over again stressed the suffering in Tigray and downplayed the suffering in Amhara and Afar, although ultimately there was too much evidence for them to completely deny it, and they had to produce some reports about TPLF atrocities in Amhara. I don't know, did you see HRW and AI reports on the atrocities in Afar, Alistair? I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, there were.
There were, but they were very few. And we also saw that right after the press conference of the researchers in Gondar. I was there for the press conference of the researchers in Gondar who were talking about mass graves and decades of mass murder of Amhara people in the Gondar region, in Welkite and neighboring regions that Tigray had ultimately, after 1991, claimed and called Western Tigray. Right after that, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch came out with a report which seemed to have been designed to counter that, which did not acknowledge the University of Gondar study, and which alleged crimes verging on genocide in that area. And then there was even a report claiming that the University of Gondar researchers had been involved in destroying the evidence of mass graves in that region. This all seemed to be designed to counter the University of Gondar research, which was not even reported in the West except by me. So far as I know, the report that I produced for the Pacifica Radio Network and then put online on the YouTube is the only report that's appeared in the West about the University of Gondar study so far. And that needs to change.
Yeah. So in actual fact, the Gondar, the Human Rights Watch report came out 2 days before the Gondar press conference.
Right.
So it was even worse. But I mean, the question here is about the media, I think, and I think the real problem that you have is that people don't care. The Western media companies genuinely don't care. So, I mean, Nima El-Bagir, there's been a few reporters who've taken an interest. I mean, she at least works for a news organization. Lucy Casa is just who writes for The Telegraph and as a freelancer. She has written the worst pieces. She wrote a terrible piece about what happened in Afar, which was completely wrong. She wrote a terrible piece about what happened in Gondar that was completely wrong. She wrote a terrible piece about what happened in Gondar for the BBC, which is completely wrong. And I mean, I think those pieces of media, her pieces of media, particularly need to have complaints laid about them because they're so egregious. But the real problem, I think, is this not caring amongst the media organizations, and secondly, the Ukraine war. The Ukraine war is eclipsing and taking all of the bandwidth of all of the news organizations of the entire planet. And I think from a TPLF perspective, now is a really good time for them to try once again to invade Ethiopia, because nobody's going to pay any attention.
And you have attended the conferences in Gondar regarding to what has happened in the area we named Walqait. It was part of the Amhara region.
Yes.
What do you say regarding to this? You have seen the mass graves there. These people who are killed by TPLF was the people who protest the Walqait area to be part of Tigray. So what do you listen from the people regarding to the area, whether it belongs to the Tigray or for the Gondar area?
The research, where we're going next is back to Gondar to talk to the researchers at the university some more and find out more about what their findings are. I've conducted 3 interviews so far with researchers, so I have some knowledge.
Have you interviewed people in Walqait?
And yet we interviewed people in Walqait as well, but we would like to...
What the people say about their identity? It is one means of conflict in
well,
that area.
they speak with one voice about the horror of the last 30 years of living under the TPLF. The survey results from the Gondar University study, which I think are more statistically valid than my anecdotal observations. They show that 80% of people had experienced some form of victimization under the TPLF during the period of time of the annexation, during which where they had experienced something that amounted to a serious crime. So rape, attempted murder, incarceration. All sorts of theft of property. People told me stories. There's a constant theme of stories of TPLF fighters and various other people turning up and essentially taking the women or taking the wives of people, which is just horrific. And then in the schools there's lots of stories about child abuse, essentially by TPLF teachers. We were told by Adisu when we travelled to the area by the river that essentially the fertile lands there by the river were cleared, and they drove all of the people who had lived there and had grazed there into the mountains, and as a result of that, the mountains have been deforested. They had to try to grow the food to live on in the mountains, and that's destroyed the climate, and it's destroyed aspects of the ecological system, and there's no longer lions, and there's no longer a lot of the animals that they previously had there. This is something we need to do a lot more work of, and that's what we plan to do for the next 3 or 4 days. The report will then come out, I think, and I mean, we hope that it will receive the attention that it deserves. I think it'll be a while before the English language version is published. But I also think it's very important that this research continues and be properly resourced, because Welkite is effectively a crime scene. It is the best place in which there are witnesses and there is evidence of understanding who TPLF really are outside of Tigray. And I think that will help the international community understand how wrong they are to continue to support this group.
I'm still just trying to understand recent Ethiopian history, but if I understand the basics correctly, there was no Amhara region, there was no Afar region, there was a Tigray region, but there were no ethnically identified regions before the TPLF rewrote the Constitution and created them. And this assignation of particular areas to ethnicities, and at least formally the assignation of particular rights to various groups, to the groups in those ethnically identified areas, rights that are greater than those of other ethnic groups who may be living there, is a large part of the problem. And so I hate to see the story of Welkite. I would hate to see it reported in a way that exacerbates ethnic identity and conflict. The challenge I've perceived from the very beginning here is, and the challenge that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed faces, is that of creating an Ethiopian identity that supersedes ethnicity, and a citizenry who share equal rights as Ethiopians. So I just think that the way that the story of the tragedy of Welkite is reported and discussed, it's very important that it honor the victims, but that it not exacerbate the ethnic tension.
There is a conclusion, there is a recommendation you can make it from your study. The war needs to be ended. How the mismanagement of the US and some European countries should be corrected? What do you say in this regard?
Well, as I said at the beginning, I work with grassroots organizations. I'm a reporter and producer for the Pacifica Radio Network and the Black Agenda Report, but I'm also a member of the Sanctions Kill Coalition and the supporters group of the Black Alliance for Peace. The Black Alliance for Peace is a group of Black American, well, actually, they are a global organization, but it was started by Black American peace and social justice activists who are most of all opposed to U.S. foreign policy aggression. And so I work with those organizations to pressure the government not to pass the sanctions and not to intervene militarily.
So the government of Ethiopia, I think it's important that they understand the need to improve communications around the war, because it's extremely difficult to understand what is happening here, and when things are actually happening, it's extremely difficult to have any reliable information about what exactly is happening. There's not enough information. The information is not frequent enough, and often it is out of date. It's not clear. It's difficult to ask questions of people about things. Now, the other issue too is, I think, journalists. I mean, it's not in Ethiopia's interests to have no international journalists here. There needs to be international journalists here. Now, I understand the difficulties that the government has had with a lot of the international journalists that they have had here, but I think if they work hard at it, they can probably find some journalists who could come here, who do have open minds, who are interested, but they would need to assist them, because, I mean, not so much in terms of money, but they need to assist them in terms of helping them give access, helping them have interviews, helping them navigate some of the complexities of working here, which is a very difficult place to work as a journalist. For the international community, they have locked themselves in a prison of their own lies, and they need to get out of that prison because they're on the wrong side of reality, and the catastrophic impacts of that failure to understand what is really happening here is going to have repercussions which will be truly terrible unless they open their minds and reconsider their positions and understand that Ethiopia does not need to be a conflict zone. This war can end if they stop their support for the TPLF. And they have every reason to do so at the moment because the TPLF is actively pursuing a belligerent position. They're making it very obvious that they intend to commit more crimes. It's time for the international community to openly condemn and criticize the TPLF.
Okay, thank you. If you have any additional point or final remark, you can have it time.
Only that I've greatly appreciated the graciousness and the welcome of the Ethiopian people.
I've very much enjoyed my time here. People have been very kind, they've been very open, they've been very sincere, and yeah, it's been a pleasure to be here, and it's an truly extraordinary country.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Dear viewers, you are watching our program named Messenger. Thank you for your time. Stay with other programs and news which will broadcast from Amara Media Corporation.